Hello and welcome to another video from oorail. This is part 2 of our building elevated track series, and in this video we're going to show you how to build a curved elevated track using the technique that we described in part 1. So in part 1, just to remind you, what we looked at doing was various different options in terms of doing elevated track, from doing the Hornby racetrack option to doing something that's a little more kind of DIY. So what I decided to opt for, and mainly because I can make it part of the scenery as well, is to use these craft boards. I got these at a hardware store here in the United States called Lowe's. It's quite similar to I think B&E in the UK. So this is popular wood. It's lightweight, but it's also sturdy enough that it's going to hold up the trains. This is a 1/4 inch by 2 by 2, and if you look at the track here, you can see that it pretty much is perfect in terms of fitting a piece of track on it. Just has a couple of millimeters either side of the sleepers, so it's a good way to gauge the track and where it's going to go. So what I opted to do was basically purchase a couple of these. Now these are pretty cheap here; they're under $2, and you only need a couple of them to do this because they're pretty sturdy. So what I did was I basically wanted to do these every half a centimeter. So I measured up basically 1 centimeter, 1.5 centimeters, 2 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters, and so on, all the way up to 12.5 centimeters, because this particular curved section is actually taking our third rail line, which is all connected all the way over to the original part of the layout, and is actually going to come up here on this side and then cut across on a bridge and then go over to a small station that's over on the other side. That will be part of a hillside. So that hillside is actually a little bit higher than the elevated track that's on the other side. So for that, we wanted to make sure we had a long enough run, and we did the calculations and did a reasonable enough grade. And I could have used the Woodland Scenics. Woodland Scenics have a product that's pretty slick, gives you 2% grade, 3% grade. And unfortunately, I'm pretty tight in terms of space here, and I also wanted to do some scenic stuff. And so the Woodland Scenic stuff, while it would have worked, and it's a little wider than this popular board, so it kind of limited the options and clearances and so on for the track that's on the inside here. So I decided to go the way I described in the first video, which was to measure this up and then cut it. So what you end up with is a whole bunch of pieces like this. And if you're wondering what I cut it with, I decided to go the quick and easy route. So I had this Dremel Solmax product. It's about, I can't remember how much I paid for this now. I think it's not too expensive. I think it might be like $50–$60 here, and it has these cutting blades. There's a circular one. You can see I've used this quite a lot on the layout. But this is pretty handy for doing custom cuts, especially if it's through sort of thinner material, like the board here. I use a jigsaw for cutting through some of the more heavy-duty stuff, but this works pretty well for cutting that type of board and cutting through sort of, slightly more heavy-duty stuff if I need to. That's not quite as thick, as you can see here, and it's not quite the clearance that you get with a jigsaw blade. So to be totally honest with you, cutting all, I think, 30 pieces or whatever this was up it took me about 2 minutes with this, so it was pretty quick and pretty painless. So if you have access to one of these tools, obviously be careful. If you're a child, don't use this. Make sure you get your parents or an adult to help you with this. But yeah, basically cutting it up works pretty well. And you can see what I did was when I measured it out, I actually wrote the numbers on this. This is 10.5 centimeters. This is 9. This is 9.5. So you can see they're not really in order. Here's 8. Here's 8.5. There's another 8.5. So yes, when I cut them up, some of them had some excess bits left over. So what I did was I made them sort of slightly similar heights. You can see there that it's exactly 8.5, so I could sort of shore up some of the points on the structure. Another 8.5 there, and there's 8, 7.5. You can see I went all the way up to there's 11.5, 11, 12, 12.5, and 10. So you can see there if I just set them out, and we'll line them up for you. You can see that they basically just kind of scale up. So once you cut them, you do need to sand them. So I use this pretty cheap sanding block. I got it from the Dollar Tree, which is a kind of a pound shop that they have here in the United States, or a dollar shop. But it's very similar to Poundland in the UK. So you should be able to pick something up like this there pretty easily, and it'll only cost you £1. And so the next stage is pretty straightforward. We need to figure out where we're putting these and where to glue it. You don't need to do anything expensive. You don't need to use fancy wood glue or anything like that. I used Elmer's school glue. It's dirt cheap PVA glue, and it dries clear and works pretty well. And you can see here it's rock solid. It's not coming off. I actually did a little bit of research, and turns out a lot of professional woodworkers and carpenters use this for their various woodworking projects. So while the only real difference between this and wood glue, which is a lot more expensive, is apparently this takes a little bit longer to dry. And to be totally honest, down here in the sort of lack of humidity because of the heating system during the wintertime, this thing took less than an hour to dry. So it dries up pretty quick, and like I said, it's rock solid. So the only next step that we need to do is to actually figure out where these things go, and to do that you sort of need to do some math. Now I explained how to do this in the previous video, and you can see here I've worked out the various steps. So we got 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90, 105, 120. If you're wondering why they're written backwards on the sheet, I worked out 30 centimeters first, and then I decided that it would be better to go maybe every 15 centimeters instead. So that is what I ended up doing. So obviously I recalculated the thing. Now the cool thing with this is if you don't want to go to the length of time to kind of figure this out in your head, although it should be pretty straightforward doing multiples of 15, you can use a website. Calculator Soup is a good one, and it has a multiples calculator, and you just go on that website, put in that you want to do multiples of 15, start at 1, and it will produce this list for you. So you can see here we start off at half centimeter, then go to 1, then 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, all the way down to 12.5. And you can see here that this is actually in centimeters, so it's the actual number of centimeters that we've gone through. And the cool thing with this is once you factor in the slight thickness for this, you can basically measure it up. And I think I worked out that it was like 16.5 centimeters. And so what I'll do is I just measure off, mark it, take the wood glue, do a strip of it, stick it down in the wood glue, make sure I got all the clearances right, put wood glue on either side, on either end, and just let it dry, and then move on to the next one, and so on, and work my way down. So you can see I've done that over here on the curve, and if I move the camera just a little bit around this way, you can see that it starts off over here, and then it goes all the way around on the curve up to there. And now this track that's on here is just there for kind of testing the clearances. This curved track here, I thought about using set track. The track that's on it right now is 18-inch curved radius track from Atlas, which is equivalent of about second radius. I think I'm going to probably go and use the flex track from Pico just to kind of custom curve that, just because the bend coming off here on this section right here where it goes from the set track to the flex track there with the concrete sleevers is a little bit sharp, so I want to kind of blend that into a better curve. Now one of the nice things with this, if I move the camera back over to where we're working, one of the nice things with this is that once I've got these all situated, this one's not glued in. Once I've got all these situated and in the right place and glued down, I can actually fill this up with foam. So I can take just polystyrene bits, cut it up, blend the way I want that curve to work out for the hillside and scenery, and then I can, once it's all cut into shape, I can actually use plaster cloth. And what we'll do is the plaster cloth will actually dry along the top here and will make it smooth so the track can sit on top of it. And so what you end up doing is that the track and the hillside sort of blend together, as opposed to it being sort of a bunch of different hills with the track sitting on top. So we'll blend this into a natural curve and make it look like it's part of the scenery, and then we'll make sure it's flattened enough so the track bed will go and sit on top. And one way you can do that is to place this track on, this popular stuff on top of it. So if I put that there, for example, you can do something like that and get the curve naturally as well. Now obviously the cross section will require a little bit of extra work, but putting that in there and using the polystyrene and the foam and using the plaster cloth to cover it will help you blend that into hillside, and you'll be able to see that in the layout update. Hopefully that will come along shortly after this video. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go and measure off the remaining ones all the way over to the other side. And it's pretty straightforward. I'll actually measure the ones here so you can see what's going on. If I measure the inside of that, like I said, it's about 16, as I think I said, so it's 16 and a half from the outer edge, 16 from the inner, so I think I was measuring from the outer edge, so it's about 16 and a half, like I said. So we'll move down from this one, find 16 and a half, and it doesn't have to be super accurate. As long as you're within a millimeter or two, it'll be pretty okay. And so just line it up like that, and we'll basically glue it along. Now one thing I typically do is on this inside track here is pretty okay clearance, but I gotta make sure that I'm not going to put anything particular on the track side. So like for example here, I'm going to put a surface mount point motor, so I want to make sure that there's enough clearance here. If I got to put on this side, I'm going to have to sort of figure out a way to embed that into the scenery when I do it. But that's basically it in terms of setting that up. So what I'm going to do next is, like I said, measure out the rest of them, and then show you how I glue a couple of them down, and then in the next video we'll show you the finished product. Alright, so before I show you guys where I've glued it down and the process for that, I just wanted to show you how I test the clearances. So after I've done some measuring and stuff, it's always good to test it with a loco or coach that you know is one of your longest, and especially with the curve, it's better just to check the clearances. And I can take a pencil and use it outside of the coach and sort of run along the line to get kind of an idea where it's at. I typically test with the longest EMU coaches that I have, as well as these Pendolino coaches and the Mach 4 coaches. They tend to be the longest set of coaches that I have. And if the Mach 4 and the Pendolino coaches work, I'll typically not have any problems with anything else. You can also use something like the downloadable clearances PDF and print that out. I use that as well. In fact, I use that to figure out the clearance from the end of the track here to the wall. So you can see there, give you an idea that the Pendolino coach will clear the curve on the top just about, and it will clear the curve on the bottom as well without hitting the scenery. So in terms of the clearances, it looks good. So we're going to go and continue gluing down the other sections now. So I'm not sure if this will show up on the camera, but basically our 7.5 mark is there, our 8 mark is here, our 8.5 marks here, and over here we have our 9 mark, and then our 9.5 is there, and then the rest are off camera. And if I turn the camera over just a little bit, you can see I basically stopped measuring where that ruler is. For now I'm going to put that in, and I'm not quite sure if I want to take the bridge directly across, or if I'm going to go a little bit this way. The section there where the curves start is actually going to be a hillside. We've got the upper level that I need to build, so there will probably be land on the other side of that. So I need to get this up to about 12.5, because that's where that far section will be. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so gluing it down is going to be pretty easy. Here I have the correctly numerated sections. Here's my chart that I had earlier. Like I said earlier in the video, all the calculations can be done using multiples calculator, or this is pretty trivial stuff. You can probably do it in your head. So once it's all written out, you can make sure there's no errors. And once you've got it measured out, you don't really need this anymore. And so the next step is basically to put down the glue. So the next one is 7.5. We want to make sure that it's got a good clearance on the other side, but we also want to try to keep it as far away from the track as we possibly can, mainly because I want to be able to use still some trackside details, and I'm going to need some clearance there to put this sort of hillside in as well. So it's going to be one of those either walled off sections, or it's going to have an actual kind of rock face sort of thing going on. So like I said earlier, all you need to do is take the glue. So we will put a blob of glue down just like that, nothing crazy, and then you just take this, and it doesn't matter if it's upside down or right ways up. In terms of that, you just want enough to make it sit there, and then take the glue and just fill in the edges. I'll do it this way so you can see. So, and then down the inside edge like that, and I usually use that just to straighten it out, and then the other side as well. And usually that's all it's going to take. You could also do this and squish it down if you prefer, but it doesn't really matter. So then on to the next one. We'll do the same thing. So my bottle of glue here is starting to get towards the end, so good kind of blodule of glue there. Take our number 8, set it down, make sure it's reasonably spaced, and then just run some additional glue around the side here. And this will dry all clean, and plus we're going to run the plaster cloth over it and the other scenery stuff, so it's not really going to matter. And like I said, you can use scenery, you could use a wall, you could use one of the scale scenes or mall railway scenery walls, or one of the things are Metcalf, whatever you want to do to finish off the scenery. But this is basically just show you how to do the elevated track. And you don't really need to fill in the middle part. The spacing of about 15 or so for the ½ centimeter is enough. It gives you a good rise. It's not going to overtax the locos. It's not going to send stuff flying downhill. You go the other way, and it will give you enough of a space to fill this with either newspapers or foam, or whatever material you want to use. I'm going to use polystyrene, just from packaging stuff. We bought some furniture and stuff over Christmas, so that all came neatly packed in large amounts of polystyrene, so it kind of saved that. So yeah, so we'll just fill that in and grate it out, and then we'll put the plaster cloth on top of it so it's flat, and then we can either use, like I said, the craft board, or we can use just try to smooth out the plaster cloth so that it's flat, and the foam is sort of flat between here and there, and put the track down on top of it. What I'll probably do if I do that is sort of maybe let the hillside roll a little bit higher into the paper here on the back scene. Alright, so I'm going to go and finish the rest of the gluing here. You guys don't need to see me do that. and we'll show you the end result before the end of the video. Alright, so here you have the finished product. You can see we've come all the way down here to the 12.5, so there'll be a bit of a straight bridge or something over in this area, maybe even extend the hillside area. Yeah, not quite sure. Figure that out shortly. We can see here I've got a class 37 with a mixture of different coaches, just to make sure that there are no clearance issues. And so far so good. It's looking pretty good. So we're gonna go and let this glue dry. It's gonna take a couple hours, maybe even as much as 24 hours for it to get fully rigid. You can see here there wasn't much clearance towards the end here, so the track's pushed up pretty close to the wall. So I'll have to be careful when I build out the scenery, make sure that there's enough space for that. But so far it's looking good. I think we'll get some nice walls or some sort of rock face in there, and it'll look pretty good. Might be a little tricky to try to blend it in with the scenery in the background, but hopefully it won't look too bad. And yeah, so that's basically it. So that's part 2 of building elevated track. I think I ended up using 3 of these boards, so it cost me about $6 or so to build this, and maybe half an hour of my time, 4 or 5 minutes to figure out the math and stuff, and then about 4 or 5 minutes to cut the wood, and basically about 20-25 minutes to glue it all down and measure it out. So it's looking pretty good. I'm quite happy with it. So like I said, we're going to let it dry, and you can sort of see there in the distance what it might look like on that upper level. It's complete. Alright, so before we wrap this up, I just wanted to give you a idea of exactly how tall this elevated section is. You can see here, this is the 12.5, this is 12, it's 11.5 right here. And so you can see, if we were just doing a normal kind of raised track, you might want to give some room for overhead catenary if you're planning to do something like that. But so to give you an example, if I grab the some Dapol overhead catenary here, you can see obviously this would go down through the baseboard, so you need to take about an inch off of that, so you'd probably be down about here somewhere. You'd be looking at making sure you leave enough clearance for your catenary. So the reason this is actually so high is this is going to be an extension of the third rail line. So the third rail line goes over the intersectional layout, goes through kind of a station area, and it's going to come up here and go around here, then go around up against the sidewall there. And at the same time, we're going to have in the foreground here a raised track level about at this height, I think. That's going to go through here with a large, pretty decent bridge structure. I'm still trying to figure out if I want to have it this high, or if I want to go maybe down a little lower, so that the hillside section that's over here by the power station is at 2 levels. And the reason for that is we have a hillside section that's on the opposite side of the layout here that we want to interconnect it with, and it's probably obvious now why I haven't actually done any of the scenic work on the lower level of the layout yet. And the reason for that is we always planned to add an upper level. I just hadn't figured out how I was going to do it, and I wanted to make sure that I had something that was prototypical. So I found various examples and pictures and so on, so I was happy with that, so now I've gone ahead and implemented it. Alright, so you can see here this works really well. All you needed was a couple pieces of craft board, some glue, pencil, a sanding block, and a ruler, and then you could either use a saw or like I used the Dremel Max, which made light work of cutting all this up in a couple of minutes. And so it's pretty easy and pretty straightforward, and like I said, it's highly customizable, so you can do whatever you want with it and make it work on your layout. You can see here that I'm dealing with very fine clearances, but it'll work, so I'm quite happy with it. Alright, so that's for part 2 of building elevated track. If you haven't seen part 1, search the channel. I'll try to put a card in or something like that at the end of this video so that you can get a link to it. It was quite a while that I did it. I think it was like almost 3 years ago now. Now the next part of this video will show you the completed section and with the scenics and so on, and I'll probably do a layout update and maybe a how-to doing the scenics as well. So I may do part 3 of this, showing you how I did the scenics for this. It really depends on how this goes. And then the fourth part, I'll go back over to the part of the layout that I was working on for the elevated track part 1 and show you how to do that shorter distance with the more steeper track elevation. Alright, well, I hope you guys found this interesting. If you haven't subscribed already, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. Alright, well, until next time.